Keep in mind, Kemet is only 5 years old.
I got a cut. See it?
Yep. And put a bandage over it. Then it'll go away.
Where does it go?
It go down here in your blood.
And where does it go?
Then it'll go in another country.
What country do you think mine is going to go to?
China.
And where did this one go?
Italy.
Italy.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you speak Italian?
Like this. Mamma mia.
Under a header on their site, does my child require my consent before receiving the vaccine? They say there is no minimal age for giving consent under the Healthcare Consent Act 1996 of Ontario. They say if the individual is capable to provide informed consent, parental consent is not needed. Informed consent means that you understand what the vaccine involves, why it's recommended, and the risk of and benefits of getting or not getting it. So I guess right off the hop, I would just ask, what makes up informed consent in the legal context? Is a 5 to 11-year-old child truly able to make that informed decision on this really pivotal decision in their life?
Well, I would certainly argue that a 5 to 11-year-old is not capable of making an informed decision, even if the elements of informed consent are supposedly met. There are 3 elements to informed consent, and that is capacity to make the decision. And I would argue that a 5 to 11-year-old does not have that capacity. The healthcare worker who is proposing to administer the vaccine would need to adequately inform the child of all relevant information about the vaccine. So that would include the benefits of the vaccine and the risks. And as well, that person would need to be satisfied that the child comprehends the information provided to him or her. And again, I would argue that a child 5 to 11 years old would not be able to comprehend the information provided. The third element to informed consent is that the child is giving voluntary consent, which means that there's no coercion, either threats or promises, and no duress. So those are the 3 elements: capacity, informing the child, and voluntary consent. And so if the healthcare worker is satisfied that those elements, those conditions have been met, then the healthcare worker could proceed with administering the vaccine.
So in this case, it would be the healthcare practitioner who's administering the vaccination would be making that decision, whether or not they believe the child's making informed consent. So yes. I guess the next question would be, like, what happens? What's the legal recourse for vaccination if a child in that 5 to 11 age group goes and gets vaccinated against their parents' will, and the healthcare practitioner decides that they've met informed consent? Is there legal recourse for that parent? What are the options for them?
So if the child receives the shot against the parents' wishes, is that what you mean? Or if the child is given informed consent? Okay. So, I mean, I would argue that the child's Section 7 charter rights have been breached if the child is vaccinated against the parents' wishes, against the child's wishes, because Section 7 says that the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. And so I would argue that those rights have been breached and that an action would lie in that regard. Also, I would suggest that a person should perhaps consult with a personal injury lawyer and see about bringing an action in personal injury if the child is vaccinated against the parents' or child's wishes.
Is that even without an adverse reaction presenting itself, just based on the premise that it was against the parents' wishes?
I would say yes, but I mean, certainly I would say that the charter right of the child rights have been breached. In terms of personal injury, I would suggest that the parent or guardian should obtain legal advice from a lawyer who practices in that area.
In the case of an adverse reaction, does it change if there was, I mean, for instance, heavens forbid, but if myocarditis or pericarditis were to present itself after this, especially in the grounds of not having parental consent, what does that look like? Does that change the legal recourse at all?
I think that would bolster the case for personal injury, absolutely, if there's an adverse reaction, because then damages can be proven.
Now, in the Healthcare Consent Act of Ontario 1996, which the Waterloo region references, Section 20, subsection 2, they discuss this. If a person is incapable with respect to a treatment, consent may be given or refused on his or her behalf by a person described in one of the following paragraphs. Under that subsection, they say the person described in subsection 1 may give or refuse consent only if he or she is at least 16 years old, unless he or she is the incapable person's parent. So, am I reading into that wrong? Is there a conflict here between what the Waterloo region is saying and what the Healthcare Act itself is saying?
No, because Section 20, subsection 1 of the Act states that if a person is incapable with respect to a treatment, consent may be given or refused on his or her behalf by a person described in the list below. So the person would first need to be deemed incapable of giving informed consent because the person perhaps couldn't understand or comprehend the information being given. So that the child would first need to be deemed incapable. And so if the healthcare worker proposing to administer the shot deems the child capable and then goes through the process of providing informed consent, then Section 20 wouldn't even come into play.
So basically the options for a parent in this situation, if it happens, is to take that to court. I guess they would argue that a 5 to 11-year-old child is not capable of making that informed consent. In my mind, like I said to you before, it's just that I don't believe a 5-year-old can really make an informed decision on something like this. I'm somebody who's been studying this, well, since the very beginning, reading medical journals, reading everything I can get my hands on, and I'm still struggling to understand it. So I don't know how a 5-year-old can truly make an informed decision on such a pivotal matter.
Well, there are some options, though, that I would like to point out. So there is the Substitute Decisions Act in Ontario that provides for a power of attorney for personal care, where a person can be authorized by the grantor, which would be the child, to make decisions on the grantor's behalf. So that's an option. Another option I would advise parents to do if they don't want the child to receive the vaccine is that they advise the school of that, and that they do so in writing, and also that they speak to the child's teacher, the principal, the vice principal, as many people as possible, so that they are aware of the parent or guardian's views about this. And then in addition, I would advise parents to educate their child about their views so that the child is aware, and if the child is approached and requested to participate in receiving this vaccine, that the child is equipped to say no if that's what the parents and child want, if they don't want it. So I think a lot of education and communication is very important in order to avoid any kind of avoid the vaccine accidentally being administered or intentionally being administered.
All right. Well, we thank you for joining us. I hope this clears some things up. I really appreciate you addressing these questions with us. Where can people support the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms? And what's the best way to reach out to you if they have any questions, concerns, or potential court cases themselves that maybe need representation?
Yeah, well, we have a website. It's at www.jccf.ca. And so if a person goes onto the website, there's options there to reach out to us in relation to any cases. So there's intake form that a person can fill out, and that information then comes to us lawyers, and we assess those claims or those requests. And there's also a section on the website to make a donation.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Charlene Le Beau with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Thank you.
Tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap. They distort, so question as if you Warshak. Horsemen, force men, and they've long been having the course mapped. It ain't that you can't see.